permits up in Reno, and he said that any blemish on your permit can last forever. And that just kind of didn't set with me. So since I was coming here anyways, I thought that I would just ask you guys to look at that, and maybe you want to add in some sort of prior problem reporting, like the 5-year span that is seen on other permits, falconry permits, commercial permits, or something of the case. Just for future falconers that come in, if they do have a blemish on their record, it helps them to know where they stand and how they can redeem themselves with the department before they move forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Questions from the commission at all? Concerns, comments? Commissioner McNinch, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not even sure what questions to ask, to be honest with you. I've been around a long time, and this is a pretty unique request. I mean, can anybody remember anything like this?
No.
So for me, not asking questions isn't a sign of not interested, but I need to hear from the department, and I need to formulate some questions for them and try to wrap my arms around everything before I head down the decision path. So I just wanted to let you know that, and I do have some thoughts on other things, but I'll share those here in a little while. That's just kind of where I'm at, I think.
Yep.
And I've actually grown with the department. When I first arrived, the permits looked like citations, and it said, oh, Joe can have a African battler eagle. And I remember I would have about 12 of these that were stuck with a push pin on my corkboard, and that was my permission to have these birds in Nevada. And I think some of the laws, you know, like no person in Nevada shall ever have a bald eagle, I think a lot of those were written, you know, long before there were people like me, you know, people who, you know, do know how to present them properly and do have the background and the resume to be able to do the resource, you know, a good service. And that's why Captain Steve Albert found a way to get me a bald eagle permit, even though it wasn't really said in the regulations that you could just easily apply for one. So I've been working with the department for a long time, but yeah, I've grown to the point where it is unique, and I understand that. And I know it sounds self-serving to make this request, but I'm the only one that keeps hitting this at every renewal. And Nick Everett went around the horn with me asking people, is there a way to combine these permits? And he hit a wall also, and that's when I thought, well, you know what, let's put it to you guys. And that's why it's here. But thank you, sir.
All right, yes, Commissioner Booth.
We received some opposition to your request, and I was wondering if you have any letters of recommendation from individuals in the state that would support your request.
Well, I don't. I didn't expect that this was going to be a long trial of my whole history or anything. I mean, this is really just a request to be able to add migratory birds to the commercial permit. I don't know who would even be in a position to make such a recommendation.
Have you provided? Have you performed with your birds in the city or outside the state to where they could write a letter of recommendation for approval of your request?
Most of the letters of recommendation I have from several zoos and aquariums are just about my program in general, not about this specific request. So I didn't focus on those.
So no character recommendations or anything relative to your. Are you indicating that you were cited years ago, and you feel that because you were cited years ago and you're no longer allowed to perform in the state of Nevada? Is that what you're saying?
No, sir, not at all. When I agreed to accept that small charge of the poorly worded email, it didn't affect my birds or permits or activities in any way. In fact, I received another endangered Andean condor 6 months after that, and Fish and Wildlife Service had no problems with it. So I think they just got over-invested in me, and they really wanted a win. And I know that sounds like I'm belittling what happened, but there was a chance of me going bankrupt and losing everything if I continued to fight them. I wanted to fight them on ethical principles, and my lawyer said, you need to think about your birds in the long term, and they're offering you an out, and I took it.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner McNinch.
Okay, I didn't expect to say this at this point in time. So, Mr. Crothwall, for me, people that have been around me long enough know that I'm a pretty strong supporter of regulation. It encourages voluntary compliance with laws. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I would hope that, anytime, if you were cited and there were problems, that it's been properly addressed. We get people in front of us all the time that have violated things like trapping laws all the time. We see it every meeting pretty much. A handful probably with some hunting laws, and there's probably many other examples, boating violations, whatever the case might be. So I can look beyond that. I do hope that, as I would with anybody, if there were violations or there was lack of care with the birds or whatever the case might be, that there is proper enforcement and it's progressive to the point where permits aren't issued and things like that. So that's the arena. That's kind of the position that I'm taking. So what I'm trying to say is that I'll reserve my ultimate judgment. That's been adjudicated in another forum. I accept that. So I give you the benefit of the doubt. And if we've got regulations that are antiquated, not clear, if there's a better way of doing that, I'm open to that. Commissioner Keel knows I've helped write a couple of regulations or changes to regulations, just trying to clean things up. I hate ambiguous, old, antiquated regulation, and so my mind's open to it, and I'll look past the other things, assuming that things have been taken care of, unless I hear something otherwise. So I just think it's important. I want to put that out there, that I'll focus on the regulation, and if it feels like there needs to be some change there because it's not right, then I'm open to that. So.
Yes, sir, and that was 15 years ago, and there isn't a stack of problems, facing me every day. Like I said, 2 months ago, Warden Zach Blackwood came over to do an inspection, and you guys would be hearing if there was constant problems. It's my world is not dark like the woman said. So that's why I needed to address it. I don't write those poorly worded emails anymore. I mean, I make sure people have permits in place, even though I assume everyone has a permit. I found out that day that you have to ask.
All right, anything else at this time from the commission? All righty. Seeing no additional comment at this time, I would like to invite the department to come up and hear from the department as well, if we could.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Jasmine Kleiber, Biodiversity Division Administrator, for the record. We've reviewed
Can you
both
speak into the microphone so we
little
can
bit
hear,
more?
please?
Okay. Yes, better? Okay. We've reviewed both petitions and developed recommendations to both, or suggestions to both petitions. I'll start with the initial petition and discussion over the conservation education permit process and the request to amend NAC to allow for charging fees to fair market values for that. And then I will follow that up with the second petition. So the department has reviewed this petition submitted regarding use of migratory birds for conservation education programs and migratory bird and the fee structure around that. Based on our evaluation, we believe that the petitioner's request can be accommodated through the existing NDOW commercial permission permit process, which provides a structured and legally compliant pathway for possession of these birds for the use of public display and or exhibition. And the ability to charge that monetary fee for the display and or exhibition of the birds listed on that permit. Right now, amending the existing regulations for the conservation education permit would not align with federal regulations that govern migratory birds, including Migratory Bird Treaty Act and associated Fish and Wildlife Service permitting requirements. Given that federal law establishes strict protections and permitting guidelines for migratory birds, any regulation changes at the state level that diverge from these standards could possibly create compliance issues as well as enforcement challenges. Then for our recommendation to the commission is to deny the petition as submitted, but inform the petitioner that their objectives can be achieved through the use of the existing commercial permit framework while maintaining consistency with federal requirements. And I believe that's in alignment with what the petitioner has suggested. I'll stand for questions on this one, or if you guys would like me to move into the next petition, I will as well.
But the wheels are turning, ain't they? Here as well.
Yeah, so I will if I.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Jasmine, so can you help explain your thought process behind the internal works, how that would work internally so we understand it a little better?
Yeah, so as the petitioner has already described, previously he had been advised that he could not have these species on the commercial permit. We don't know where that advisement came from, and so we dug deeper into the existing regulations and statutes as well as policies. We also reached out to the Fish and Wildlife Service to understand their permitting processes, and what we ultimately determined was that it appears to be completely allowable to have these species that he's requesting to be on a commercial permit rather than on the conservation education permit. Now, the difference between the two is that the commercial application, as mentioned, it is more expensive, but it still allows for the purposes that the petitioner is asking for. So he would be allowed to charge fees above simply what the program administration would be. And that's the limitation with the conservation education permit. It limits the fees that can be charged for those same purposes. And the difference is that one is commercial, one is education. And so we do believe that he would be able to achieve his goals under a commercial permit.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So the example that was thrown out with the bald eagle at the NFR really resonated with me because I'm trying to understand how they could come in and charge a permit, but just because he's a resident, he wouldn't be able to or charge not a permit but a fee for their participation in that. And so cleaning that aspect up and allowing those to be combined into one permit could possibly clean all of that up.
Yes, that's our belief.
And there's no regulatory change that's necessary. It's all an interpretation of the existing regs and policy, internal policy, and how those things are permitted.
Yes, that's how we understand it.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that one? All right. Seeing none, Jasmine, yes, if you would then touch on the second petition.
Jasmine Kleiber for the record. So regarding the petition to amend NAC language in the second petition to include language relative to conviction of a felony or misdemeanor within the last 5 years, we've reviewed this petition and we believe that this request can be accommodated through internal policy rather than by amending NAC. Amending the existing regulations may have unintended consequences, including potentially impairing the department's ability to monitor for patterns of noncompliance, investigate complaints, and ensure proper oversight. Several NACs currently include a 5-year term for disclosing violations of federal or state wildlife laws or regulations, which provides critical safeguard in evaluating applicants and identifying any prior compliance concerns. Importantly, that provision only requires disclosure. There's no mandatory denial of a permit based solely on an applicant's response to that question on our permit applications. Section 9, as referenced in the petition, simply authorizes the department to suspend, revoke, or deny issuance of a renewal, to deny the issuance or renewal of an eagle permit under certain circumstances. Under that case, the department retains discretion to assess each application on a case-by-case basis, considering the nature and circumstances of any prior violations, while also ensuring that permit decisions align with wildlife management protections and objectives. Our current regulatory framework allows NDOW to identify and respond to patterns of misconduct, improper possession, inadequate care, or potential misuse or violation of terms of a permit. A regulatory amendment could limit NDOW's ability to conduct necessary reviews and investigations. Our recommendation is that the commission deny the petition as submitted and instead direct the department to develop an internal policy on the review and approval process for permit applications where previous violations have been disclosed. This approach would ensure that the petitioner's concerns and objectives can be met while introducing greater consistency in the review and approval process, while preserving NDOW's ability to effectively enforce wildlife protections.
All right. Thank you for that, Jasmine. Any questions, concerns on that for Jasmine? All right. All right. And any other questions, I guess, at this time for the petitioner?
I mean, I guess
Yeah.
the only thing I would ask, sir, is do those responses satisfy your inquiries today?
It sounded like she has passed to make these things happen. The second one, I don't have as much of a dog in the race. It's just for future applicants so they know where they stand, because I got confused by that. But anything that allows me to do better programs and include migratory birds in the same fee, I'm happy with, whether it has to be done through commission or through the department. I have no problems working with them for that. I just didn't see a clear path to make that happen after my discussions with Mr. Everett. And again, we don't know where this originally got started. It was so long ago, it just became a way of life. And I don't know why I picked this winter to want to solve it. But thank you guys for listening.
All right. Any other questions? It sounds like, again, from what I'm hearing, at least specific to the first petition, that, yeah, it can be, those items can be obtained with that particular commercial permit. So sounds like everybody's okay on that one. And then as far as the second petition, again, does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments around, as mentioned by Jasmine, about the department looking at possible policy on review and the approval process? All right. So with that, how about a flavor of the commission? Any other ideas or motion or thoughts around that?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Oh.
do we need to go out to public comment on the?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we do.
Okay. Because I think I'm ready for a motion.
Yeah, no, I apologize. Yes, this is possible action, so I will take it out for any public comment here in Las Vegas.
John Hyatt with the Clark County Cab, for the record. I was at the cab meeting in which there was a lot of discussion on this particular one, and the story that I heard at that time was very different than what was just presented here. And I don't know exactly where the truth lies in this, but I think it's imperative that there be some more investigation to find out exactly what's going on here. Mr. Krathwohl mentioned one of the things he's involved in. He said raptor rehabilitation. As far as I know, I've never heard of him being involved in raptor rehabilitation here. There's only been one person doing that in the South. It's been very hard to find people to do that. So I'm just really perplexed as to what's happening here, and I would urge you to delay any action on this and really take a serious look at what's going on. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Any other public comment here in Vegas?
Good morning. Good morning. Steve Marcus, White Pine County. We discussed this quite a bit, and we don't know who Mr. Krathwall is, but looking at the way it was written, it does seem to be very self-serving, and we feel there's underlying issues and or problems that are not here. That's the first part. Second part is, if you're going to get that close to that line where you're going to have a blemish, what says you're not going to be over that line again? So, if you want to cross that line, how are you going to be as Mr. Krathwall put it, a full-time steward of avian education and raptor conservation? That's a line that's pretty distinct, but if you're crossing it and you're going to get a blemish, are we going to allow that to be repetitive? Blemish, 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 or do we put a line somewhere where once the blemish is there, it's kind of like a misdemeanor. 2 misdemeanors, 3 misdemeanors, felony. Where do we stop? Where do we stop? So we came to the recommendation that we deny this. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment here in Las Vegas? All right, seeing none. How about any public comment on Zoom?
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Rob Beamer with the Carson City Cab here. We did discuss this as well pretty extensively. We did take the opportunity to reach out to department staff and get a little bit of background. And so I really appreciated Jasmine providing her recommendations on behalf of the department. We discussed kind of similar things. We didn't know the whole background of the petitioner, but we felt that the position we would take would be supporting the department and their recommendations, of course, and try to let any kind of personal bias or anything like that not stand in a or affect our decision, right? Affect our perception of the petition here. And the other thing that we talked about was I think all of us on the cab, Carson City Cab, had confidence in NDOW law enforcement, that I'm certain that they are aware of the petitioner and his operation. And I would be amiss. I think a few of us members on the Carson City Cab discussed this and said that we'd be amiss if they weren't aware of anything that was wrongdoing or animals being treated poorly, anything like that. And so with that, we wanted to make sure that we voiced a kind of a neutral position on this, more so supporting what the department would recommend. And I think Jasmine lays out a really good plan for the petitioner, that I think there's kind of win-wins here, right? And so that's where we stand. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no additional public comment, I will now bring it back to the commission for any other discussion or questions, concerns, comments. Anybody? Yes, Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for me, I guess it's the train wrecks are always interesting to see and understand what happened. But that's, I appreciate that you were forthcoming, Mr. Krathwall with the incident. I don't know if there's others. This isn't really necessarily, in my mind, the forum for that. I need to understand what the regulatory issue is. It sounds like there's a path forward that addresses an issue and or clarification of policy or regulation. I'm okay with that. You know, I know that law enforcement understands my position, that if there are violations in the department, then I hope that progressive enforcement is taken to the point where it's resolved, whether, you know, non-compliance is fixed and it doesn't occur anymore, or people are worked out of the system. I'm okay with either way. It's a, you know, there's regulations that are required. So my assumption is that whatever issues Mr. Krathwall has had have been addressed by the department. I'm not hearing otherwise. That his unique situation, anything he proposes is largely going to be self-serving. So I can accept that. That's just the nature of the beast on this thing. So with that, I guess I'll make a motion. Do we want to handle each petition one at a time here? I'm not sure how to reference one over the other. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's
Okay.
one at a
So
time.
with respect to the first petition, which one would this be? How do I distinguish between the two? For charging a free market established fee for educational programs, that we deny that petition with the understanding that the department can and will address through internal policies, you know, develop, change, or clarify internal policies to address the issue of charging fees. Is that adequate enough?
Yes, Dag Burkett.
I guess, maybe ask Jasmine if that's,
I was kind of looking at her, but she wasn't giving me a nod.
Yeah, yes, Jasmine, if you would.
Jasmine Kleiber for the record. I think what we're recommending on this one is that the petition be denied in favor of working through a commercial use permit where none of the guidance or clarification would be necessary because that is already an accepted and appropriate mechanism to fulfill his request.
Okay, so I was under the impression that we had some, that internally that there was, what's the word I'm looking for, interpretation issues with the permitting and stuff. So, okay, so I guess my motion is to deny with the understanding that the department will work through the permitting aspects, the clarification of and interpreting existing policies and processes that would address this particular issue, that not through a regulatory process.
All right, we have a,
Commissioner Burkett's, or sorry, Dag Burkett, I'm not sure if does that cover it?
yeah, I just wanted to clarify that there was no need for the department to create new internal processes under your recommendation. That's all.
Fair enough. My was really after the interpretation and the cleaning up of the process, yeah.
Under your motion, that
all right, we have a motion from Commissioner McNinch for denial based on the reasons provided, and a second from Commissioner Keel. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, seeing none, that petition number 1 is denied. And petition item number 2. Anybody have any additional thoughts or comments or questions on that, or a motion? Yes, Commissioner Keel.
Sure, I'll take a stab at this one, and I'll move to deny this second petition as well and direct the department to develop an internal policy on the approval of the permits.
All right, everybody seem okay with that one?
And I'll second. You should have done the first one too.
All right, so we do have a motion from Commissioner Keel on denial and a second by Commissioner McNinch. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that petition number 2 denied. So thank you again.
gentlemen.
All right. Moving on now to agenda item number 10. This is Elk Statewide Management Plan Update. This is informational. Wildlife Staff Specialist Cody McKee, presentation on progress and timelines related to the elk plan revision will be provided. So, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Rogers. Give me 1 second here. So, Cody McKee for the record. I apologize in advance. I'm going to try to do 2 things at once. Scrolling through slides in my notes, as well as advancing the slides.
Cody, I apologize.
Go ahead.
Could I interrupt for just a second? We've got, and I don't know if it's a technical thing that can be fixed easily, but we have some of the monitors up here that are showing the presentation, and we've got a number of them that are not. So it looks like everybody to the left of me has the presentation up on monitors, and myself to the right. Yeah, monitors are on, yes. Commissioner Walther, is your...
It's not, but...
Okay.
You got these buttons over here? I don't know if they're back here. They change it from... It's not. It has different...
all right. Yep, we are good. Perfect. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. All right, Cody, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, again, Cody McKee for the record. Happy to be here today to talk a little bit about the statewide elk plan revision. We're going to go over progress towards accomplishing this goal of providing the commission with a modernized document. Talk a little bit about the background for the process. I'm going to give you a snapshot of the content that we've been working on over at the Department of Wildlife, and then finally we're going to go over some timelines at the end. And I also just want to acknowledge, one, the statewide elk plan, the current document was drafted in 1997, and it took several years to get to a final plan. There were a lot of people instrumental in getting to that 97 document. There were a lot of our partners that were instrumental, whether it was Elk Foundation, Nevada Bighorns Unlimited, or Cattlemen's. I don't want to discount the work that everybody did to get to that because, to be honest, it was a very comprehensive product, and it really got the department, as well as the elk program, to where it was today. And then also, as we've worked through this revision process, several of our biologists have been very helpful in reviewing, providing content, and suggestions to make this revision a more lasting product. So this is the part where I'm going to do 2 things at once. All right, so as I pointed out, the original plan was adopted by the Board of Wildlife Commissioners back in 1997, so that makes it almost a 3-decade document. This was intended to be future-proof. I discussed our current process with some of the past authors. Larry Gilbertson was one of those, and he pointed out that when they wrote it, they wanted this document to last. They didn't intend for us to have to go back and do this revision. However, I would point out that a lot has changed in the state over the last 3 decades, and I hope that as I walk through this presentation, the commission will understand why it is that we want to update the document to include information that's been gained over that time, The original document was prescriptive oriented. That is, there are a lot of management strategies and recommendations that were included. What we're trying to do now is more of an information-driven process, and that is we want to include the things that we're doing so that we can inform both our current management, but also the future, and give our future staff and biologists an opportunity to look back and see what worked and what didn't over the course of the last 3 decades. So the department formally requested to review and revise the statewide plan back in 2021. I think I stood here in the same spot requesting that. I think a few of you were here for that. And I think with a lot of humility, I would say that progress has not been what I hoped it would be. And that's for a variety of reasons. I don't want to get into those, but I think that a lot of those were warranted, and I think that there's also some, just internal things that came up that made it difficult to have prolonged progress towards getting to a final product. So as we've been working through this revision, there's 3 elements and themes of the statewide plan that to me really stood out. And I think that these are the 3 elements that add to the strength of the current statewide plan and what we want to build underneath. And I kind of think of this as some of our former staff have pointed out, this idea of a 3-legged stool. If any one of those legs gets knocked out, the whole stool will tumble over. And I think we can very much look at elk management in the same framework. And so it starts out with maintaining viable and productive elk herds in both occupied and suitable habitats. That's a given. If we don't have habitat, we can't have elk. However, one of the real successes of elk management here is our ability to both prevent, mitigate, or eliminate unwanted elk use on private lands, and to address private land conflict in a very meaningful and quickly responsive way. And I think that over the last 3 decades, we've shown that when issues arise, we will respond rapidly and address those problems as they come about. And then finally, and this goes back to some of the themes I think that our CABs are getting at with respect to subplans and population objectives. Elk are the only wildlife or big game species in the state where we're subject to population caps, and we're frequently towing the line between having too many elk. And at this point, we have no other mechanism for regulating that population growth other than hunting. We have very high adult survival, very limited instances of predation. If it weren't for hunting, we would have a heck of a lot more elk here. And I know that in the early 90s, when the statewide plan was being developed, one of the principal concerns was that we were not going to be able to control elk populations and the rapid growth that they're capable of doing. And I do believe that we have shown, especially over the last decade, that we can absolutely use Nevada sportsmen to regulate growth. All right, so we've talked a little bit about background. I'm going to briefly cover some of the content and the things that we're focusing on. This is by no means all of the content that we've discussed, but it gives you an idea of some of the areas we're focusing. And I really want to sort of demystify the process so that the commission and the public are aware of the work that's currently underway within the elk program. So first off, to kind of set the framework for where we were 3 decades, and today in 97 we had about 4,000 elk in the state. Since then, I think that we have 3 distinctive population pattern or growth patterns that really tell the story about both what elk have done and then also the department's ability to effectively manage those herds. So from 97 to 2015, we experienced near linear population growth. In 2015, we had about 4 times as many elk as we did starting in 97, and that number was 18,000 elk, about 5,000 more than what we are permitted under our current management plan structure or subplan structure. However, I think a lot of people that like to hunt elk think back to 2015 and think that those were the golden years. What a lot of people don't understand is that we are mandated to maintain numbers at a certain level. So over the next 4 years, we implemented some very aggressive harvest strategies, and you'll see here in our population growth, we knocked the herd down to population objective, which is about 13,000 elk, pretty quickly over the course of 4 years. There were some very creative management strategies and very creative hunts that were adopted. Again, those are the kind of things that we want to make sure that we capture in a revision update so that down the line, if anybody encounters similar issues, they can refer back to something like the statewide plan to understand what we might be able to use to affect change in populations. And then finally, sort of the last story that I want to tell is the last 5 years, our population has been very stable. And that's going through years of successive drought, years of exceptionally high precipitation, but at the same time, we've continued to be able to use our sportsmen as a tool to maintain our compliance with subplans and ensure that we're maintaining sustainable use and multi-use on Nevada lands. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to some of the harvest management strategies. On the left, we're going to talk a little bit about strategies recommended or highlighted within the 1997 plan. And then on the right, we're going to look at where our harvest management objectives and guidelines, where we're falling today, to give you a sense of how things may have changed over that time. So in 97, the original management plan identified an objective of 15 to 40 bulls per 100 cows within our populations to maintain the hunter experience and quality that are expected. Today, it's actually 60 to 100 bulls per 100 cows. Now, these are our modeled ratios. These are not the ratios that are observed on surveys, and the reason is we just can't find the bulls when we fly in February. They break off into small groups. They disappear into thick timber. However, we have very strong confidence in these modeled bull ratios because we wouldn't be able to maintain the projected hunter outcome that is then realized at the end of the hunting season. 75% of our harvested bulls were 5-point or greater in 97. Today, 70% of our bulls are 6-point or greater. So you can see a theme over the course of time of added conservatism in the hunting opportunity that we're offering. We've done a very concerted effort to collect teeth, incisor teeth from bulls. That gives us a very accurate estimation of age structure within our populations. The first year we did that was in 2001. I can't go back any earlier. The average age of a harvested bull from about 200 records was 5.1. The last year that we collected teeth in 2021, the average age was 6.1. So again, things have changed over the last 3 decades. You guys may be familiar with this figure. This is highlighting some of the information we've been able to gain from incisor tooth collection and how that relates to antler growth. On that horizontal axis, you'll see age, and on the vertical axis, that's the main beam length, so the outer length of the antler. This is a data set that includes over 2,000 records through 2015. And what you'll note is that there's a very strong hyperbolic relationship. So as age increases, the main beam length also increases, but that decreases until about 7 years of age. And so at about 7, that relationship flatlines. We began using this main beam length objective of 50 inches or greater to comprise a portion of our harvest as a surrogate for collecting teeth every year, because collecting teeth every year, we send out a lot of mailing envelopes, we get back tons of teeth, somebody has to process them, somebody sends them out. We felt like using a surrogate for age through main beam length gives us a really good sense of age structure. We're still maintaining that harvest quality, but at the same time, it's reducing a little bit of the burden associated with collecting teeth. All right, so I'm going to move on now to, I think, one of our pillars of elk management here, and that's our various private lands programs. I'm going to show you 3 different private lands programs that we currently operate. One is a program that was established by legislation before the elk plan was finalized in 1997. We're going to look at a program that was identified within the 97 elk plan, and then further vetted out after the fact, and then a new program that we did not identify within that plan and is more recent over the last 6 or 7 years. So the first of those is our elk damage mitigation program. So on every big game application for elk, we collect a $5 damage fee from applicants. This money goes into a fund to help prevent unwanted use and damage caused by elk. Most of those expenses are fence building or fence reconstruction, but it also includes direct payments. We also have the ability to use some of that for administrative fees associated with administering this program. I would also note that actually in 2015, the commission was given authority to adjust that amount up to $15 per application. I don't think that we need to go there. Unfortunately, the lowest it is $5. And what that means is today, that balance for our elk damage account is $2.1 million. So we have a very, very big nest, so to speak, in case any unwanted issues arise. However, with that said, we're bringing in about $450,000 a year through this program. And over the last biennium, we spent $737,000. So we're trying to spend that as best as we can. However, I do take a lot of pride in making sure that we're using sportsmen's dollars very wisely and frugally. And so there have been instances where we just said no to a project because it wasn't worth it. We could easily pay for damage rather than fences. So the next program I'm going to discuss, this is our elk incentive program. This is a program that was identified in the 97 plan but hadn't been fully vetted and planned. And essentially this is a program that's been earmarked to incentivize tolerance of private land. And in doing so, and in allowing elk to be on your property, we will issue tags that can be either used by you, given to a friend, or even sold. This program has gone a long ways towards both gaining tolerance, but also just the number of, I think, issues we've had over time have gone down tremendously. We've issued over 2,000 tags since the inception of the program in '99. And I think that just at our most conservative estimates, that probably equates to about $20 million of economic generation if all of those tags were sold, with 860% enrollment in the program since that time. And then also because of concerns over the privatization of wildlife, or some other states, their private lands programs have really come into focus. I do think that this program provides a good balance between both maintaining the public resource while also getting that tolerance. Only less than 10% of our antlered elk tags get issued through this program annually. And I think that's a pretty good benchmark. So then our final program that I wanted to discuss, this is actually a new program that came about in the last decade and was not part of the statewide plan. These are our private land antlerless elk tags. So this is a program where we work directly with the private landowner. We identify an issue with elk. They've indicated to us that they want to go through a program where they use hunting as a tool to manage elk. We develop a hunt boundary, and they're able to select the hunters that can go out onto their property to push elk and haze them away to prevent that unwanted use. We've offered over 500 tags with the success rate just over 60%. So we're getting tags into landowners' hands, and they are using them to deal with the problem. And this has been a program that people have really liked because it ensures that there's people that they trust or people that they can feel confident with on their private lands are going to be out addressing issues. And it really is a surgical tool for helping us address complaints. We can put people into a very precise area. So one of the things that we've dove into a little bit through this process, and it's something that is just really interesting to me, this is the economics of elk here in Nevada. And when I say economics, I'm not talking about the money that's generated for the department. I know a lot of people can be sensitive to those kind of topics. I'm actually talking about revenue that's generated for the state in rural communities through grocery purchases, lodging, taxidermy. These are monies that are going back out. There was a study done in 1988 and then a follow-up study done in 2022. I've converted numbers here to be comparable for inflation in 2020 or in 2020. And then also 95 was the last year that the state elk plan discussed economics. So just trying to provide an apples to apples comparison over about 25 years and how things may have changed. And so these expenditures are combined for bull and cow, and it includes a hunter's party. It excludes big ticket purchases, and for non-residents, it also excludes purchases made from outside of Nevada, like if they bought plane tickets to fly out. So in 1995, a hunter spent about $1,900 converted to 2020 values. And in 2020, they spent $3,600. So over 25 years, we saw that people are willing to just spend more of their hard-earned money to pursue elk here in Nevada. But where it's really obvious or the impact can be really clearly articulated is when we look at how many tags we had in 1995, where we would have expected to generate about $500,000 in economic revenue for the state. In 2020, we had almost 5,200 tags, contributing about $18 million to Nevada. So again, that's not department revenue. That's money that's being put back out across the state and helping our rural communities, sporting goods businesses, so on and so forth. All right, so just a few of the other contemporary management elements that we are including within this process. We have a lot of new harvest techniques. I didn't cover any of that, but we have spike hunts now. We have antler point restrictions for certain depredation hunts. We offered wilderness-only tags, and there was even a point in time where we gave people an elk tag if you got a deer tag, the once referred to as the deer elk management hunts. Those have been discontinued for quite a while, but if we ever needed to use them, this plan is a place where we can put some of the benchmarks or guidelines that we used in developing those hunts to make them as successful as possible. We're just wrapping up a habitat suitability project with Kelly Stewart at the University of Nevada, Reno, where she's done a meta-analysis of 20 years of elk collaring information and monitoring data to help us develop this habitat suitability map and identify areas within the state where we can see either habitat limitations or places where things seem to be doing pretty well, or maybe there's places where elk should be doing well and maybe they're not. And so the question is why? And then in the most recent version of the USGS's Western Migration Report, Volume 5, we published 4 different corridors for elk herds that we share a boundary with Idaho. And I'm happy to provide a link to that document if anybody's interested. But that picture on the right is the inside desert, so kind of the eastern Jarbidge area. All right, so as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about a timeline associated with the revision. The first 4 bullets are talking a little bit about kind of kicking it off back in 2021. I did notify stakeholders in 2022 of our intent to do a revision. I heard from 2 people out of a list of several hundred folks. So at that time, it didn't generate a lot of public interest. And then last summer, we really kicked off this process of accumulating information and revising the document. And frankly, I'd hoped to have a document for you guys. It's scattered across a lot of different places, and I didn't have a time to get it pulled together before our deadline to post materials for the meeting. But I really think a reasonable timeline, if we continue to approach this as proposed, is we could have a complete draft by this summer and get that out for public scoping and comment. I absolutely want to make sure that we get people's perspective and input, and then finalize the revision by the end of this year. So just to kind of wrap it up, we have several techniques and processes that are related to elk management here in the state that we've adopted since '97, and they're not explicitly outlined within the state plan. And I really think that this information in its current state could be improved, consolidated, and synthesized within a revised and modernized elk plan where we maintain the core of the prescriptions while also kind of building up and improving the information that we provide about the current status of elk management here. So again, it's an information-driven process, not necessarily prescription, because I think the original plan did a great job of providing us with strategies on how to move forward with our elk program. And with that, I am happy to take any questions that the commission may have or the public. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. McKee. Appreciate that. Very informative. Questions from the commission at all? Yes, Commissioner Booth.
Cody, so what you're saying is that once we get this out to the public, that when the individual county elk management plans will come into place, and they'll manage those county plans according to the state plan?
Commissioner Booth, Cody McKee for the record. So the process for elk planning is complicated. I think we might be the only state that has not just an umbrella plan, but also local level plans that are providing local guidance. As it currently stands, the statewide plan is an independent document to those subplans. That's how it was developed and delineated back in the 90s. And again, just to refer back to, I wouldn't say controversy. I think it was a hot topic back in the 90s. Elk reintroduction, elk management, and then elk population growth. And so I think that at the time, that process was a good path forward for managing elk and making sure that all stakeholders were on board with our approach to managing. So currently, the proposal, at least starting in 2021, was that we would take this state plan and revise and modernize it, but there are no population objectives tied to it. And to be honest, I don't want to be public enemy number one here. The idea of opening subplans is what it really boils down to are population objectives. It's a number that we can manage elk towards. So the question that I have, or that I'm pondering, is there a way that we can incorporate those population objectives into what we're trying to do now with the statewide plan? And the reason I say that is because I think across the state we have 12 subplans that would, I suspect if we start with those proposed by the Elko Cab, that others will probably follow suit. And so could we creatively find a way to integrate those population objectives into what we're looking at with the state plan? And I know this is an informational session, so I'm not asking for the commission for guidance. I'm just kind of putting that out there as something that I've thought about more recently.
Thank you, Cody. I know a part of the elk management plan in Humboldt County was the ranchers that were very concerned about the increase in population of elk and the adverse effect they may have on ranching. And it was pretty controversial at the meetings. There isn't an issue with elk populations in Humboldt County now, but I think if the elk herds were to come over there again, I think that we would again have the same situation where there would be some very serious concerns relative to their lifestyle, relative to ranching. The other question I have is when you talk about elk management on private lands, are there any restrictions relative to the number of out-of-state tags that those landowners can give out? Is it a 90-10% rule, or is it whoever wants to purchase them?
Yeah, Commissioner Booth, are you speaking towards the elk incentive tags or the private lands antlerless
Private
elk
land.
tags?
The
The
owners,
private land cow hunts? Yeah, so we have no restrictions. They can pick from a list. We can give them a list of nearby hunters that they can use. It really depends on the
So it's a free-for-all.
landowner. And the reason is we've offered to provide depredation hunters in the past, and there's often concerns from the landowner about possible damage to infrastructure within their properties, and they feel like if they're able to use hunters that they know and trust, that potential damage is much less. Yeah. And then the incentive tag program, which you had discussed, again, it's a similar situation where we issue those landowners tags, and they're able to use them, give them to friends, or sell them to whoever they would like.
so they have the freedom of choice then on who they, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Vice Chair Young.
Thank you, Chair Rogers, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. McKee. Great job. And I apologize if I missed it or you might have danced around a little. As to the sub-plans, I know today we're talking about the management plan for the state. Is there conversations about reopening the sub-plans and the population objectives in those sub-plans or not, or undecided? Director Janae.
Thank you. For the record, Alan Janae. So rather than putting Cody on the spot, I'll cast a line of hope. I would say that is to this board, to this commission. We're taking a stab at revising the statewide plan. As Cody has alluded to, as we're contemplating, okay, what's the next step in that? What does the structure of this look like? Is this, should there be an attitude and a wish to revisit those sub-plans? Do we tier off of that, off of the statewide plan down to those to address specific information? But I think as we heard from Jim Cooney from Elko County CAB earlier, there's a request from them. There's been multiple asks in the past. And I think the department is looking for guidance from the commission as to how to proceed with those. I would ask, probably in contemplation on the back end of when we at least get a draft of our statewide plan out, so that if there was any opportunity of opening any specific sub-plans, that we could use that in consideration.
Thank you, Director Janae, and good job, Cody.
All right, any other questions for Mr. McKee? I did have one question, Cody, and that is, you did mention a couple of times population objective, and then I think you showed on the one chart that 13,000 number. Is that population objective number of 13,000, is that an accurate number, number one? And then number two, is that something that was set back in 1997?
So the approximately 13,000 is an aggregate of all the sub-plans. So each individual sub-plan identifies a population objective for individual elk herds. We have one herd where we actually, instead of a strict number, it's based off of landscape use and competition, where we've done years of monitoring to ensure that elk and livestock and other users are not adversely affecting one another. But yes, so within the state plan, it doesn't say 13,000. 13,000 is the sum of all of those sub-plans.
All right, gotcha. Thank you for that. Anything? Yes, Commissioner Bourne.
I guess down the road, I would like to hear from the cabs and see what their input is on a local level to opening up sub-plans. And the only other thing I have is I worry about getting governmental agencies on board and participating in the sub-plans in today's world. I think that might be a difficult task to get them to the table again.
All right, yeah, Point taken. Anything else from the commission at this time? All right, sounds like much more discussion to come as we get to draft and then, figure out where we go from there. But great work, and we appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So moving on from agenda item number 10, we are now on agenda item number 11, and this is a presentation on emergency bighorn sheep capture and water hauling in southern Nevada. This is informational. Habitat Administrator Mark Freese and Staff Specialist Joe Bennett. A presentation on FY 2025 drought management of water developments and bighorn sheep. Emergency bighorn sheep captures and water hauling plans will be provided. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Rogers, members of the Commission. Mark Freese, Habitat Division Administrator for the record. So I wanted to just introduce Joe Bennett, Staff Specialist Joe Bennett. He has been working on water hauls and bighorn sheep management in southern Nevada for the better part of 5 years. He's our resident expert. I personally want to thank Joe for his role in helping with the water development efforts. He's definitely embraced the one NDOW approach, covering numerous jobs and helping support water development program. And he's here to give you an update on the emergency water hauls and bighorn sheep translocation efforts. If you recall, Game Division Administrator Espinosa and Staff Specialist Cox gave you a presentation at the January meeting. It's a very fluid situation, and Joe's going to give you an update on those things. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Mark. Chairman Rogers, members of the commission, Joe Bennett, Wildlife Staff Specialist. I wish I wasn't giving this presentation on the heels of talking about elk and population trends and everything along those lines. However, one thing I do want you to keep in mind as I go through this presentation is that adaptive management aspect as we talk about bighorn sheep in southern Nevada. How we manage in the presence of drought, the conditions that we've been experiencing since 2020, and then also how we get to a point with bighorn sheep with well-established population objectives, because trying to manage some of these sheep herds to the levels that we were managing prior to 2020 just may not be feasible now. So, as I'm sure many of you have heard from the presentation in January until present day, so I'm going to start with how we got here. So, the preponderance of moisture in southern Nevada, or the Mojave Desert, I'm going to start with an annual cycle with the monsoon season in July, August, and then go through November till now when most of the moisture falls. So, normally monsoon season, July, August, I'm sure people who've been watching the news have seen we broke multiple records in July, 120-degree days. Then we go into October, November, when it normally starts to cool off. It was well over 100 degrees here in early October. So with the help of the Fraternity of Desert Bighorn, other volunteers, we continued to monitor these guzzlers or man-made water developments through the cycle. And then as you can see here in this U.S. Drought Monitor map, as you got into the winter months, it's extreme drought conditions similar to what we experienced in 2020. So we didn't receive moisture for about 8 months. Normally you would get moisture towards the end of November that would cause some green up and allow these sheep to move off these water developments. We just didn't see that this year. And then as we approached Christmas, we got to the point where we had critically low projects. We still were jumping 20, 30 sheep off of these water developments. And then that's when we initiated the first emergency water haul that I'll start with here. And then the last part of this annual cycle is if you don't receive precip from about the end of November till now, we've been a little fortunate the last couple weeks, and it looks like next week, you're probably not going to get it in the Mojave Desert until the monsoon season. So we're already starting behind the 8 ball with regards to the vegetative aspects and water levels in these guzzlers. So the December 2024 water hauls, again, I won't take full credit of this. Pat was walking into projects, putting remote water monitoring systems up on some, and we had people on DOD lands, refuge lands. It's been a concerted effort among multiple entities. which I'll go into here in a minute. So those 2024 water hauls, we identified 10 projects and 6 mountain ranges that we needed to haul water to at that time. It was actually the day after Christmas, which I'm sure my wife was happy about that. But so of those 6 mountain ranges and 10 water developments, we hauled 37,000 gallons. And then we hoped for rain. And obviously between that December timeframe until February 14th, we didn't receive any moisture. And then even with the moisture that we received on February 14th, these remote water monitoring systems that I'll get into here, or that I'll dive into here in a second, showed us that a lot of these mountain ranges only received about 2/10 of an inch of rain to slightly over an inch. So for reference, our standard apron collection system in southern Nevada is a 40 by 80 foot apron, which 1 inch of rain equates to about 2,000 gallons of water. And so a lot of these projects are probably between 6,000-7,000 gallons clear up to just under the water right level of 20,000 gallons with some of our newer water developments. So just to put that in reference. So fast forward, we're to present day. A couple weeks ago, we did a maintenance flight. We identified it would have actually been the end of January when we really hit the panic button, because it was kind of getting to that end of that moisture pattern that we would expect. So we identified 27 projects in 12 different mountain ranges, and that 75,000 gallon figure that we originally estimated is actually low. To date, over the last couple weeks, we hauled to 12 different guzzlers in 6 different mountain ranges, and that was about 60,000 gallons, and we'll discuss some of that on the field tour today. So this is where kind of we get into the weeds relative to costs associated with these projects. So the December water haul efforts really opened our eyes. You know, it's about $1,000 an hour to fly our NDOW helicopter. Staff time, travels, about 28% of that project. You're renting water trucks, so on and so forth. It equates to about $10,000 or $15,000 dollars a day to conduct a water haul. And our approach that we did in December was more of your Band-Aid approach. Let's get them 50-60%. Hopefully we get some moisture. That didn't happen. Now our approach is we're going to fill these guzzlers to the brim because we don't want to keep playing catch up, you know, once we get to the warm season. So you can assume that you can fill about 1 guzzler a day, just for reference. So that as we go through the costs and some of the commitments that we have moving forward here, the water haul effort alone that we'll probably complete between now through about mid-April is going to cost about $500,000. So that's just one component of this drought mitigation strategy. As you can imagine, you don't have moisture, you don't have vegetative resources. So let's remove some mouse off the landscape in a few of these populations for the betterment of the entire population. But again, there's costs associated with that as well. So it costs about $1,200 to move one animal, to capture it. And that's just to capture it, I should say. And then you have collar costs. Ewe collars are about $1,200 a piece. Ram collars are about $1,800 a piece. And we plan on collaring between 70 and 80% of these individuals. You also have it explicitly mentioned in our biennial big game release plan, which you'll see some of these updated translocation sites at the May Commission meeting, where we have to conduct pre and post predation management. So I'll put a little nexus to my new job there. And then again, you still have staff and salary and travel costs associated with this. You have a ton of people coming from different portions of the state to help with these efforts. And then you have sampling costs associated with that. So we got to make sure we're not exacerbating a problem and managing these bighorn sheep populations in the presence of disease, bacterial pneumonia, or Mycoplasma ovipneumoniae. We wouldn't be able to do this without our partners. The next agenda item, you're going to be discussing a principal ask from the Heritage Principal of $500,000. That's obviously pending based off your discussion. We have a $100,000 commitment in hand from the Dream Tag Fund, $100,000 from MBU, $100,000 from the Fraternity of Desert Bighorn, $250,000 from QU and Ovis Grand Slam. And then we've reached out to many other sportsmen's groups such as WIN, Safari Club, Elko Bighorns Unlimited, Fallon, MBU. I'm sure I'm remiss to mention a few. So as I alluded to earlier, the remote water monitoring systems have really changed how we can manage these guzzlers. So to date, we have between TrackDag, RanchBot, and everything else, and a like a NOAA station, we have approximately 25 of these systems on the landscape among multiple mountain ranges. This project would not have been feasible without the Wild Sheep Foundation and an ask from individuals in this room, from the Fraternity of Desert Bighorn Sheep to the Wild Sheep Foundation. It's about $70,000 project for 35 of these units, and there's a coupled rain gauge, which we've been referencing and I'll continue to reference. And then we also have a track tag system where they have donated a couple remote water monitoring systems so we can contrast how those systems work on the landscape. WIN is another partner that helped contribute to this project. This is just a map depicting the data that we could pull up in real time, showing percent level. This is from a couple weeks ago and doesn't incorporate the most recent rainfall that happened a couple days ago, where it didn't equate to much. A lot of mountain ranges were about 1/10 of an inch of rain. However, like the Stout and the North Meadow valleys did receive about another additional inch of rainfall for reference. So just this data is changing how we can manage these things in real time. So one project I wanted to mention explicitly is the Penny Water Development in the McCullough Range, Hunt Unit 263. So this is a slick rock project, as I'm pretty sure most people are familiar with. What's unique about this project is after the ground got saturated after about 4/10 of an inch or 0.4 inches of rain, the next about 0.5 inches of rain made that project go from 25% to about 75% in a hurry. So another thing that this data allows us to do is compare the efficiencies of these projects. And we're realizing, and I'll go into it in the next slide, that some of these projects are a heck of a lot more efficient than others. And there's vapor locking, there's different things that we're learning that we're gonna have to fix in the coming months and years as we build ourselves out of this problem. So this first rain event on February 14th, this just shows some of the efficiency aspects that I mentioned prior. So Heaven's Well, South Pint Water Range, it received about 2/10 of an inch of rain. However, there was no noticeable change in the capacity before and after the rain event. I was actually up there when we conducted that water haul a couple weeks ago. We took some of the HDPE pipe out, we put some T's in, and then it was taking the water every time we dropped on the apron. So we're adjusting and adapting with what we can do on the mountain as we go here. And then I just mentioned the Penny Water Development, and then based off the collection surface capacity for Foggy in the Spotted Range, we determined it was collecting at 90% efficiency. So this data is very useful in how we move forward in managing this program. So now I'll get into where I suspect you guys are going to have most of the questions. The water haul efforts are pretty straightforward. So timeline for the Bighorn sheep work. So in the next couple weeks, we're going to be conducting pre-sampling of the potential release sites, which I'll go into in a minute. The 3 source stock herds that we're looking at right now are the Muddies and Blacks, which that's probably the obvious one. Then we're also going to pre-sample the Arrow Canyon range that has the NTTR strain of bacterial pneumonia, which is moderately virulent. And I'll go into some of those details of potential release sites and why our thought process is at here in a second. And then June is when we would conduct the translocations, probably the 3rd week of June. And a lot of that is to give these sheep the ability to acclimate to northern latitudes as you translocate sheep from a desert environment to central Nevada and potentially Utah. And then, as I mentioned briefly before, we'll be looking for NGO contributions to pay for pre and post treatment for mountain lion removal in these release sites that I'm about to go over, because it wasn't built into the FY 2025 predator management plan, because this is an emergency situation that we weren't anticipating to this extent. So this map, I know it's kind of busy, but it's our statewide Mycoplasma ovipneumoniae strain type map. And the outlined gray areas are the areas that we have not detected bacterial pneumonia. So you could see just to the right of Las Vegas on your screen, that's the muddies and blacks there. The translocation sites that we're looking at to potentially move those sheep, and I'll get into them here in a second, are the Cortez, which is obviously NEPA compliant, the state of Utah to fulfill the complement of their nursery herd. And then we're actually looking at a few areas that have been exposed to maybe not some of the more virulent strain types, such as the Fairview Slate strain, such in just south of Winnemucca, like 045, the Tobin Range, 182, the Stillwaters, 183, the Clan Alpines, and 202, the Wassuck Range. But I guess the point to glean from this is the state of Nevada is dealing with about 15 different strain types. A lot of these populations have been exposed to multiple different strain types, so it's very difficult to manage in the presence of disease so you don't exacerbate a problem. So these are the 3 source stocks that I just mentioned. What I want you to look at here is obviously the strain type, the strain virulence, and then that lamb ratio. And so we don't want to exacerbate a problem. We're obviously not trying to move these sheep in areas of drought that are being restricted by drought conditions, obviously, because that just doesn't make sense. So your top lamb ratio is the furthest from current date. So our bighorn sheep management plan states that we'll conduct aerial surveys on a biennial cycle. So for the muddies, for example, last year we had a lamb representation of 42, which for reference, if you're going to have a maintaining population, you want to be probably in the low to mid 30s, so that indicates an increasing population. 36 would have been last year, and then 19 was probably indicative of the other drought years that we experienced, you know, from 2020 to 2022 on that biennial cycle. So I gave you the survey sample. That includes both the blacks and the muddies, where we classified 218 sheep in the blacks and 442 in the muddies. One thing that I think I need to mention is how the density of sheep in the muddies in relation to water developments is. So prior to 2020, the Muddy Mountain Wilderness, or the west side of the Muddy Mountains, had a population segment or a herd of approximately 150 sheep. And that estimate now, we'll be lucky to see 30 or 40 sheep based off those contractions from drought. So the majority of the sample size is coming from that area, and we'll be driving around it today on our field tour, is where the 5-Ram, Flipper, White Basin, Rogers Point, that segment of the area. So you have a higher density of sheep utilizing those water resources in kind of a more restricted area, to put it for reference. So, and then the Arrow Canyon Range, again, lamb representation's marginal. It's been exposed to the NTTR strain, but we did have a record survey of 169 sheep in there. And so based off our pre-sampling efforts, if we're going to, the department's recommendation is if we are going to remove sheep, we're going to do it with like strain types. So we take 2 different samples with the pre-sampling efforts. There's a blood test, and that test for ELISA exposure, has that animal ever been exposed? And then there's a nasal swab to try to indicate if there's DNA or if they're a chronic shedder or still shedding that pathogen. And so the couple areas, because you don't, again, want to exacerbate a problem by moving them into a drought area, the 2 areas that I'll get into are Stonewall and the Mormon Mountains, because we had enough DNA to indicate they're like strain types, they should have the antibodies. The most difficult out of the 3 of these is the McCullough Mountains. So that population's been contracting since it was exposed to the highly virulent Mojave strain in 2013. And it's actually, as you could see here, been exposed to multiple strain types, and that lamb representation is still showing that it's being infected by or have chronic shedders, and that's what Hunter Harvest PCR results is showing us as well, that it's still actively on the landscape. So the sample size is 206. I mean, in the heyday, Pat would classify well over 300 animals in there. And then we're kind of constrained by movement of animals where we need to move them from if we were going to explore that option by wilderness boundaries, so on and so forth. So that one's kind of the difficult one, even with pre-sampling, to make it make sense from a disease management standpoint, because you can haul a lot of water to the Poppy Water Development for the same costs that it's going to take to move 20, 30 sheep, for example. And I just mentioned the potential reintroductions and now state options. These are obviously for Muddy's black sheep. Cortez Mountains, that's up to 60 sheep as written in the NEPA document, and that's obviously dependent on NEPA compliance. State of Utah would be probably 30 sheep from the Muddy Mountains to fulfill that complement. And then, like I said, we're thinking outside the box like we maybe haven't been in recent years and managing in the presence of disease with these potential release sites for Muddy Mountain sheep who have not been exposed to bacterial pneumonia. The Tobin range, when you look at that lamb representation, all indications in the 50s and 60s to me indicate that there's not chronic shedders on the landscape. The Clan Alpines and Stillwaters looks like they were infected 2-3 years ago. They were originally exposed in 2018 and 2019. So what we're noticing with that Fairview Slate strain, which all three of those populations have, is it gets knocked down a couple years and then you see it start to rebound. So pre-sampling, and another key aspect of the pre-sampling is you want to pre-sample 13-month-old lambs for that exposure, because you would expect all the adults to be exposed. But if the lambs from last year are exposed, then you can have a pretty good sense that there's active shedders out on the landscape, and we might need to reevaluate that release site. And then the like I said, Clan Alpine Stillwaters, and then the Wassac Range 202 comes with another inherent challenge of 8 to 12 animals each year being hit on the road. So the idea there is if we pick that release site, we would release on the east side on potentially state park lands in coordination with them for the augmentation, and hopefully have them in print on top of Mount Grant opposed to them being in constant hazard on the highway. And there has been communication with land management agencies on all these potential release sites. We're not sure once we identify, but it should at worst be a categorical exclusion, but don't quote me on that right now. So this is just a map depicting the potential release sites for the Muddy and Black Mountains. As I just went through, it's Cortez, Utah, those are the obvious choices because they're reintroductions or disease-free. And then you've got your other 4 in-state options dependent on the pre-sampling results. And then for the Arrow Canyon range, as I mentioned, Stonewall and the Mormon Mountains, they have the same strain type. So with having that same strain type and that exposure, they should have the antibodies for bacterial pneumonia or Mycoplasma pneumoniae. Now, one thing to note here with Stonewall, so we discontinued that hunt a couple years ago based off density of animals and disease presence, and that population got so low. So that lamb representation of 12 was from 2022, and then the lamb representation of 3 would have been 2 years prior to that. So we don't have more recent data. So the more logical proposed site here based off the lamb representation of 42 would be the Mormons, just knowing we haven't ever had to haul water there and probably has the resources and groceries on the ground. But again, we got to do the pre-sampling because this is something, kind of a new approach to how we're managing bighorn sheep in southern Nevada in the presence of disease. So this map just is the 3 areas in relation to one another and that they have the same strain type. And then the potential release site for McCullough sheep, the highly virulent Mojave strain is if we were going to explore anything, it's going to be like strain type so we don't exacerbate a problem farther north. Because this highly virulent strain type, we've seen all age class die-offs in these populations. And the problem is a lot of these adjacent populations with the Mojave strain are obviously drought stricken. So what do you do? And the only thing that we could think of was maybe the Spring Mountains, but again, pre-sampling, we're probably going to see active shedders on the landscape. We got to do that cost-benefit analysis of what makes the most sense in managing that population with wilderness constraints and water resources. Future management, as I mentioned earlier, we're working on improving these water developments. We've worked with our land management agencies to build on NEPA compliance for maintenance, which would include larger aprons, more capacity. However, with that being said, you provide more water, the sheep populations are going to respond. So we need to get to a point where we're managing these populations with, as Cody mentioned, with the elk management plan, population objectives, that we find ways to manage it below that threshold. Because as you could see, this is an expensive endeavor. And I see this with the movement of sheep in the Muddy Mountains as probably phase one as we go into subsequent years, depending on how conditions persist in the future and the success of some of these release sites, obviously. And then that vegetative carrying capacity. So one thing I'll leave you with is that lamb representation's good, but that's probably on the hills of lambs that were born, or it is on the hills of lambs that were born last January, February, you know, when conditions were a lot better. We had a couple good years. So then now we're in this drought cycle. It takes more water to break down forage. There's less nutrition in that forage, so on. So you may not realize that lamb representation declined this year or population level effect this year. But if we don't take some animals off the landscape, I think you will see it pronounced next year. And then also we're going to continue to utilize these remote water level monitors. So that's what I have for you today, and any questions you have for me.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Appreciate that. Very informative on a difficult times. Any questions from the commission at all? Yes, Commissioner Booth.
Very good presentation, Joe. I appreciate it. A question I have is, how is the Jefferson Range? I know they had, they didn't have a hunt there this year, I believe, for sheep, did they?
There was.
They did?
Yeah.
Is it ready to reintroduce sheep over there on the Jefferson Range?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Booth. So I was a Tonopah game biologist for 5 years. I supervised that position until recently, so I'm very familiar with Hunt Unit 161. So it was just exposed to disease a couple years ago, and then we saw an all-age class die-off. We're still seeing that effect on lamb representation. So it's something that we need to monitor in the future. I think there's better outlets based off the demographic parameters we're seeing in the presence of disease. We will continue to evaluate areas each year as we need to move sheep to northern latitudes where conditions are better. But I don't think right now it's at the highest priority.
All right. Yes, Vice Chair Young.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joe. Great presentation and very unfortunate situation we're in right now. I've got two questions. One, as the former Tonopah biologist, what do you think the long-term plan is for the Stonewalls 252? Is there viability there at one point? I know historically that was a great unit for quality and quantity. Just want to get your thoughts on the future of Stonewall.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Chairman Young. That population, even when I was the biologist, was probably the saddest thing I've seen. Watching it go from 8 tags, classifying over 300 animals to what it is today. We've done multiple capture efforts in there and further in TTR land since I've started, even till the last couple years. And what you're dealing with is you're dealing with multiple strain types. We did have some compounding predation in there. And it's just difficult when you're trying to manage in the presence of disease, because it's difficult to manage the predators because you have, you know, DOD restriction. It's difficult. You have poor lamb recruitment with disease. I mean, there hasn't been a favorable lamb representation since 2014 in there. And it's been single digits to 12 since then. And so hopefully it can rebound. Unfortunately, it's at a pretty low level right now, and hence why the hunt closed. But maybe we can look into these similar strain type experiments, see how it's working maybe in the Mormons, and then go from there. But you don't want to introduce naive sheep to a situation where they're guaranteed to be infected with bacterial pneumonia.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. My second question is, and you might not have the answer today, but obviously today we're looking at the muddies and blacks McCall is 263, and then 244 the arrows. How much, and I know we can't predict the future of the weather or what's going on right now, but how much are we decreasing in the population objectives, do you think? Or do you think the recommendation will come out?
So, thank you for that question, Vice Chair Young, Joe Bennett, Wildlife Staff Specialist. So, if we were able to reduce that population, just looking at the muddies and blacks, by translocating approximately 150 animals, you'll still have a U quota associated with it, and the ram quota you can anticipate will likely increase just based off ram ratios, quality of rams in the unit age class. If we don't receive moisture between now and the third week of July, you can anticipate the 5 ram water development's going to go dry. But what we're doing in that area explicitly, and I'll speak to this on the field tour, is we're changing the way we're managing water resources in that population. So we'll be stopping at an area in Valley of Fire where we have a spigot that we can open. We have tanks that we could drive to on the west side. We just built the White Basin project where we could drive water to. It's based off aerial survey data of the surrounding populations. These 3 were identified as the ones we need to react to now, if that helps answer your question. We think that the other areas have the water and forage capacity, at least in the short term, to sustain them. Now, if this continues in through the summer months, we may be up here having a different discussion.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, Commissioner Bourne.
Hey, Joe, thank you very much for the presentation. My question's in respect to area to Unit 223 and specifically above Kirch. My understanding is that you classified on the last aerial survey last year 25 sheep in the unit. Is that correct?
Is there follow-up, or do you want me to address that now?
Go ahead, please.
Okay.
There's a
Thank you,
follow-up.
Commissioner Bourne. So it wasn't an aerial survey that classified 20 sheep. We actually conducted a capture in there a couple months ago, or a month ago, in the Egan Range, where we did sample 3 sheep and collared them, and there was about 30 sheep observed on that survey.
And my follow-up question is, what were the results of the sampling?
So the samples were negative, and we did evaluate the Egans. The issue is the subleasing of allotments adjacent to that area. Like I've had to myself respond to multiple domestic livestock incidences adjacent to there. So it's difficult, again, to think about that possible disease exposure of what makes the most sense when you're trying to move these, especially naive sheep. I would like the Egans to be more than it is right now, but it's definitely a place that we're evaluating and we'll continue to evaluate it, but it didn't quite make our short list for this year.
So my last question is, has it ever had a disease event, a known disease event?
I may defer to Deputy Director Mike Scott, but I believe the answer is yes.
Mike Scott for the record. Yeah, we documented losses in there, maybe 2000s, somewhere in there. We used to have a population estimate of about 60 to 70 sheep in there, maybe a little bit more. But there was some domestic livestock observations in there, and it wasn't long after that we just weren't seeing the numbers of sheep in there. So no direct evidence, but we did test those animals, and they did test positive back then, and we did have some losses.
Because I do know the last incident of domestic sheep was one person's small flock of 4 sheep that escaped was all that it was, and there have been some changes in AUMs in that unit that I think would get us pretty close to the 9-mile distance from domestic sheep, I believe. So that was, thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I had a couple of quick questions also, Mr. Bennett, and one is on the water hauls. And on the water hauls that we've done, I'm just curious about potential damage to some of these water projects. Have we experienced any damage when we're dropping water on these projects? And you know, as you were talking, I was just thinking, looking at the one scene of the helicopter, and just curious if that's an issue or a concern. I mean, I know we've got to, you know, get water to these projects, but damaging some of these existing projects by dropping water onto the aprons or otherwise, if that's an issue or a concern.
Thank you for that question, Chairman Rogers. Joe Bennett, Wildlife Staff Specialist. So I should have probably mentioned this. So we dip out of pumpkins, as you would have saw on some of those images or maybe on the news recently, and that's a 240-gallon bucket that dips in. It goes and drops either on the apron, or we put up a folded tank depending on what the project is, and then just drop directly in there. But these are Bambi Max buckets. We actually have the ability to drop 5 gallons at a time and different things, so you're not just dumping one full force in one small area. But we haven't seen any damage to any of these projects through rotor wash or dropping the water.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, and Deputy Director Scott wanted me to mention the folded tank. So I should have probably included an image. So they literally fold up as the description shows. They're red, and then they're either 1,500 gallon or 3,000 gallon tanks that we put up near the system, near the tank somewhere, where then we pump directly into the tank. So that really minimizes loss, rotor wash loss. It really enhances our efficiency.
All right, perfect. The other question real quick that I had was, you know, we talked about exacerbating problems, you know, specific on the, you know, diseased sheep with known strains and other strains. So my question is, I'm just curious if other states, are you familiar or aware of any other states that have translocated sheep that were known carriers or disease to other areas, and what the results were, negative, positively? Just curious at what other states have done.
Yeah, I wish Nate was here, Chairman Rogers, but I'll do my best to answer that question. So it's my experience that Arizona has released areas with similar strain type. I haven't really heard what those results were. I know they experimented with it, but it didn't really sound bad one way or the other from my just very few conversations I've had.
And have there been states that you're aware of that have not translocated like strains, that they have translocated complete different strains, and what any results of that might have been?
Not that I'm aware of, Chairman Rogers. When I was up for the Sheep Week for the professional meetings, we actually had a 2-day discussion on this exact topic, test and remove disease, and I'm not aware of any states that are knowingly moving strain types into, say, naive areas.
Mm-hmm. And then the last quick question that I had was regards from the potentially the McCulloughs over to the Spring Mountains. And, you know, again, I know it's dependent on a number of different variables, but I was just curious your thoughts or opinion on release. I know one of the mitigating issues in that unit, as you had in your report, was California. Knowing in just my personal opinion that particular unit, Unit 262, in my personal opinion, is kind of 2 units in one divided by State Route 160. If there was any thought between potentially releasing north of 160 versus south of 160, and maybe what your thoughts are there.
Thank you for that question, Chairman Rogers. And I'll just preface, this is the most difficult of the 3. Just because you're dealing with multiple strain types. I should have mentioned this. We reached out to California as well, and they're dealing with 2-3 different strain types. Some are like recombinations, is my understanding. So it's just a very complex and convoluted issue when you're talking about the highly virulent Mojave strain. But if we were going to go down that road, we do feel comfortable from pre-sampling. Again, there's a lot of contingencies here. It would be that Potosi country.
All right, perfect. Anything else from the commission? Questions? All right, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Do appreciate that. We are just before 12:30 here. In fact, what are we here? How about 12:27? So knowing we've got a couple of more items in our tour, we thought maybe we'd give ourselves a break And so why don't we go ahead and break for lunch and plan on being back here maybe 1:30. All right? So with that, we are convened till 1:30.
Recording stopped.